So again, a warm welcome to all of you. My name is Christiane Pyka. I'm the director of the German-American Center here in Stuttgart, a cultural and educational institution focusing on the United States and the transatlantic relationships. Tonight's event is part of an 8-part digital event series called EUREKA, Ländle Meets California, organized by the DAC Stuttgart on Baden-Württemberg's state partnership with California. The partner institutes DAI's German-American institutes in Freiburg, Heidelberg, and Tübingen also contributed to the series with events. A big thank you to my colleagues. I would also like to thank the state of Baden-Württemberg for the support of the series. Also, a big thank you to our special cooperation partner tonight, 100% Mensch here in Stuttgart. Thank you, Holger. In the June edition of our EUREKA series, we present Love is Love, LGBTQ plus Youth in California and Baden-Württemberg. Growing up is not easy for anyone. Being a teenager always confronts one's identity and outside perceptions. This is even more difficult for young people who do not find their place in heteronormativity. Very often, they also are facing discrimination, harassment, and even violence based on their sexual orientation or gender identity. A support system, role models, and community can make all the difference during this time. We are talking today with 2 representatives of organizations that have made it their mission to support young people in the LGBTQ plus community. And you probably know, the topic couldn't be more topical. Today, the Germany versus Hungary game is taking place during the UEFA European Championship. Since it became known in advance that in Hungary, a law against information on LGBTQ plus topics was launched allegedly for the protection of minors, a storm of protest and solidarity with the LGBTQ plus community broke out. But on some side, also a lot of hesitation and uncertainty. See UEFA. The speakers of tonight are Justin Tindall from the It Gets Better project in California, and June Wall from Lambda Baden-Württemberg. Our moderator, Annie Heger, will introduce them later on more in detail. Thank you all so much for joining us. And thank you so much, Annie, for presenting the talk. Many of our guests probably will know Annie, as she's one of the most famous entertainers in Northern Germany. She's a columnist for a national radio company, a book author, also a stage performer, and a 100% activist. So just a heartfelt thank you again, Annie, for being here with us tonight, and also to our panelists. Before I hand over to you, Annie, please let me add for the audience that already during the talk, our listeners, you can use the Q&A or F&A Frage und Antwort button to type in questions, and we will try to get to as many questions as possible after the talk. This button you can see on your screen at the bottom edge. If you feel more comfortable asking the question in German, you can do so. Please note that the chat function will be disabled throughout this event, and you will not be able to turn on your mic or your camera. And now, June, Justin, Annie, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you, Christiane. Thank you for having me, and happy Pride Month to all of you. Let me introduce myself again. Thank you for your kind words, Christiane. And it's always a little exciting for me to hear what other people say about me to introduce me. And I'm always a little overwhelmed by all the things I am supposed to have done because they're all true. Yeah, I'm originally from the very northwestern part of Germany, East Frisia, Ostfriesland, which is near the Dutch border and just a few miles away from the North Sea coast. It's a very rural area with a bad public transport infrastructure, but a very flourishing agriculture, and even its own language, its own minority regional language, Plattdeutsch. As you probably already have noticed, I'm no English native speaker. My first two languages were German and Plattdeutsch. So please excuse the grammar mistakes this evening, the lack of appropriate vocabulary sometimes, and here and there, a weird syntax. I live in Berlin now already for almost 10 years. And yes, I am an entertainer. Yeah, that's a real job, Justin, in Germany. I do that for a living. I'm all into social satirical comedy, and I'm a touring artist. And yes, I'm hilarious in German, not so much in English though. I'm a book author and columnist for several newspapers, magazines, and national radio stations, and I'm a singer. So what are my qualifications to be this event's hostess, other than that I was once young myself in ancient times? I belong to the L in the beautiful LGBTQI plus letter salad. I organize pride parades, pride services in churches, panel discussions. I hosted the prides in Berlin, Munich, Copenhagen, Hamburg, and many more. And like you said, Christiane, I'm part of the nonprofit organization and project 100% Mensch. Ganz liebe Grüße an Holger an dieser Stelle. Which translates best to 100% human, which is based in beautiful Stuttgart. So I'm so happy that I got asked to do the moderation of this digital event. And even though it is hard for me to put an end to mostly anything I do, I promise that we wrap things up before they whistle for the kickoff of tonight's soccer game. Yes, it's Germany versus Hungary tonight, and I want to dig in a little deeper now than you, Christiane, because I think this is just, it's almost like a gift for our panel discussion tonight, because it's putting our topics, our issues on a silver tablet. This game tonight is definitely not about the European Soccer Championship and who's going to win, but it's definitely about politics. It's about love. It's about courage. It's about everything we want to talk later on. And a lot of you have probably already seen it on social media. The rainbow has conquered every social network, from Facebook over Instagram to Twitter. The UEFA, the Union of European Football Association, is getting a serious rainbow storm right now. And so many institutions, politicians, companies, clubs are standing with our rights, with the LGBT rights. And the whole thing is even #1 topic on our national news. So for our non-European participants, this is what happened. The Hungarian parliament approved last week that a law that stops books and films, movies that are accessible to young people or children depicting any sexual mores other than heterosexuality. It also bans adverts that portray homosexual or transgender people as being a normal part of society. Sounds familiar, sounds Russian, not so much European, but Hungary is very close to Germany, and this is the thing that frightens me, at least, a lot. And we don't want to talk about politics tonight. Well, maybe a little bit, but our talk is supposed to be about queer youth, their struggles, their challenges. And I'm terrified by the thought of young queer people in Hungary having to face this law. So the soccer game is going to take place in Munich tonight. So shout out to all the people in Munich. I'm proud of what you have organized in the past days. Kudos to the mayor that is going to drape the city hall in rainbow flags and light up the stadium's wind turbine and the Olympic Tower. And thank you to all the other stadiums in Germany and throughout Europe that are going to light up in rainbow colors as well. Yes, this is overwhelming and emotionally overwhelming, and I was crying already a lot about this because I was touched by so much rainbow solidarity. But is something like this actually going to help? Is it going to help young queer people in Hungary? What does young people growing up queers help in general, not only in Hungary? Is there a in general, or does it rather depend on the political and societal environment? Or do we, like the kids in California, the kids in Baden-Württemberg and in Germany, do we have more in common than we might think? So this is what I want to talk to you both today and later on in the Q&A with all the participants. On the panel tonight, we have two wonderful activists and representatives that work for and with exactly these young people in the USA and in Germany. More precisely, in California and in Baden-Württemberg, which is almost the same for me. I don't know about you. I think you can switch on your microphones now because you can interrupt me anytime. Otherwise, I talk too much. It's Holger kann ein Lied davon singen. Yeah. So, welcome Justin Tyndall, who is working for the It Gets Better project. Welcome. Good to have you here. And welcome June Wahl, who's on the board of Lambda Baden-Württemberg. Herzlich willkommen. Schön, dass du da bist, June.
Dankeschön. Thank you.
So, do we want to start like right away? Are you ready for the first question?
We are ready.
June, let's start. How did you get to know Lambda and what did eventually make you jump on board even of this organization? So what was your first contact and why did you get interested?
Yeah, so this actually happened quite a while ago. 10 years ago, actually.
Oh, you were still a baby.
Yes, I was a young teenager. And I lived in Heidenheim, which is a smaller city on the border of Baden-Württemberg and Bavaria. I was still in high school, and I personally was looking for, a peer-to-peer queer youth group, people that just get together and talk, where, being gay or lesbian wouldn't be an anomaly, but rather just something that binds us together, something that everyone understood in a way. And I found this group in Ulm, which is a little bigger city called Young and Queer. And I loved it there. I had an amazing group lead that is, has been a super influential person in my life. I had a really lovely experience. I stayed with them all through my high school graduation. And that group actually was a member of Lambda Bayern, so Bavaria, not Baden-Württemberg. After graduation, I moved to Stuttgart, where I live now, to go to university. I'm currently doing a master's in information systems. And so I got settled here. And a while after, the former contacts from Lambda Bavaria reached out and saying, hey, we want to encourage Lambda Baden-Württemberg to become more active. At that point, so we're currently 3 people on the board. We are a volunteer-based board, meaning that we're not employed by Lambda Baden-Württemberg. We do this on a volunteer basis next to our
work, studies, whatever else we do. It is currently the three of us. We were brought together at the time. We sat at a table together and we decided that that great experience that we've had, or I've had with Ländle Bayern and those my other two colleagues have had in their respective youth groups, was something that we wanted to bring into Baden-Württemberg more. And so we got together 6 years ago, and we have been on the board ever since, a very stable team.
Well, that sounds good. And we'll never change of functioning in a great and a good working team, of course. But you probably also still need help, right? It's not just you.
Yeah, so we do work with whomever. So we're connected with, so essentially Ländle Baden-Württemberg is a queer youth network, meaning that we are essentially an umbrella organization that is over individual, but still fully autonomous, peer-to-peer, usually peer-to-peer queer youth groups across Baden-Württemberg, meaning that we work directly with them, provide help or whatever is needed when, someone reaches out and says, hey, there's no queer youth group in XYZ city. I want to start something. Can you help? That is something that we do. We also, before the pandemic, the years before the pandemic, we hosted an annual event where we invited youth group leaders or active youth group members to get together, to talk, to share their experiences, that sort of stuff. Then Ländle is also a sort of federal network, meaning that, like I mentioned, there's Ländle Baden-Württemberg, there's Ländle Bavaria. Other states have their own Ländles as well, or groups of states. And then there's also federal Ländle. So we work in the upward direction, if you so will as well. And yeah.
Well, good. I don't know, Justin, if Americans have ever heard of Lambda before, but we in Germany have certainly heard of It Gets Better because it's a widely known project. And I read that it actually helped you, Justin, personally with your coming out. So you have a very tight connection to the whole project. What was it exactly that empowered you back then to come out and even made you building a whole career around empowering other young queers?
Yeah, thank you. Happy to be here, June. Thank you for starting us off. It's so nice to be here with you. I grew up in a very conservative religious community in Arizona. I did not grow up in California. I grew up one state over in Arizona.
On a farm? On a ranch?
No, I was still in the suburbs of Phoenix, which is the main city there. But my family is Mormon for generations and generations and generations. And so I grew up in an environment where when you deny the existence of a group of people, right, there was, in my community, queer people, queer communities didn't exist. And so for a kid, you just assume that you're the only one. And so I went through most of my life thinking I was the only one that could be possibly feeling the way that I feel. Of course, I knew I saw TV. Occasionally there would be queer people that pop up in my life, but they weren't Mormon. They weren't from my community. They weren't from the way that I grew up. And so it didn't resonate. It didn't connect. It felt still like it wasn't possible for me. So grew up in that community, went to college in Utah, where the Mormon Church actually has a university there, BYU. That's where I went to school for both my undergraduate and graduate school. It wasn't until I left that school, actually. I graduated from graduate school and went to go work in the Dominican Republic for a small period of time for a nonprofit school there. And that was the first time, believe it or not, when I'm 24 years old, almost 25, the first time in my life that I literally lived beyond the reach of Mormonism. There were no other community members there. The church was an hour away, the nearest church. So it was the first time that I kind of got to live life on my terms. And all of the things that I had denied for so many years came kind of crashing down in the 6 months that I was there, where all of a sudden the glasses that I had seen the world through were gone, and I saw the world with a totally different light. And so I was grappling with things, thinking about things, when I was on the internet one day, and this nonprofit called the It Gets Better Project was pushing a viral video campaign since its early days. It started in 2010. But it was continuing to encourage people to share their stories, to put them out there to the world, specifically to help LGBTQ youth. And although at 24, I wasn't necessarily a teenager or super young, I graduated college, it found me. One day I was in this little apartment I was living in the Dominican Republic, scrolling Facebook or the internet or something. And someone had posted this video, particularly from a group of students at BYU, the university I just graduated from. And it was a group of students, and probably, I think there was about 10 of them, who got together and they said, you know what, we're going to make an It Gets Better video, which means they're going to put themselves in front of a camera and tell a little bit out of their story to help kids know that they're not alone.
Like a testimonial,
exactly. Yeah.
Which we are used to from church.
Yes. So that video, I mean, it rocked my world. I remember sitting in that apartment and seeing these kids, again, for the first time I'd ever witnessed people who grew up in my community, who understood the faith that I grew up in, who were at the same university I just graduated from, and seeing them not only be out, but be so proud about it, be so courageous to put their story out there, specifically knowing that they could be expelled for doing so. It changed my world. After I recovered from crying for hours and hours and hours after seeing that video, I knew my life was never, ever going to be the same again from watching that one video. And I probably watched it 400 times in the following weeks.
What
it was
like personal historical moment. Yeah.
It was huge. And I will never, ever, ever forget. It's interesting. I've never met the people in that video. I don't know them, but I feel like if I ever ran into them,
yeah.
Oh man, I would break down, because I owe my entire life to them. I did not realize how on the cusp of complete loneliness and depression I was. And they caught me at the very last moment. And I'm so grateful for that. So when I returned to the United States, I said, you know what? I'm coming out. I'm living a different life. I'm taking on this new role in my life. And I did. And I lost a lot of family and a lot of friends along the way. But it was the best decision I think I've ever made in my life. And eventually I made my way to California, and I was looking for a job in the nonprofit sector, working in education, working with youth. And lo and behold, the It Gets Better Project was hiring. And it was a dream come true. I feel like the job description, they had literally written my resume.
We're looking for Justin Tyndall.
Yes, that's exactly how it felt. And so I got hired, and I've now been with the organization for 7 years. And I love what I do. I love working for an organization. Again, I know it sounds cheesy, but working for an organization that legitimately saved my life. And I feel like I will be here for decades to come, because I owe it so much of all of the happiness and joy that I have in my life that I've received from the queer community and from being queer. An It Gets Better video did that for me. And I want to pay that forward. If there are kids out there that just need to hear that story, that's going to make all the difference.
So I'll drink to that. And thank you, Justin, for sharing your story with us. I maybe should have warned you. I cry a lot, even in public.
I'm right there with you.
Okay, good. So I cry a river. So don't be scared to get emotional or too emotional. Sometimes I get overwhelmed, but just ignore it. So we just heard about your very impressive CV, so to speak. You helped young people in Nicaragua, the Dominican Republic. You were or you are a teacher in Texas?
I was a teacher in Texas.
Okay.
Which is where I moved right after the Dominican Republic. I came out in Texas, of all places.
Texas. Yeah, great. Has it always been your focus? Already when you were living in your community, in your Mormon community, that you wanted to work with kids and teenagers, that you wanted to help kids and teenagers even before you had this this initiation moment of yours, or did this just happen by coincidence or by accident?
Yeah, completely by accident. When I don't know, I guess when I was younger, I kind of grew up in one of those homes where it's like, you're going to be a doctor, you're going to be a lawyer. You gotta do something successful in kind of that space. So growing up, I didn't really think big about what would interest me or what would draw me in. Secretly, I wish I could be an actor, an entertainer as well, but
never too late, honey. It's never too late.
And I'm in the right place for it now in California. But growing up, didn't know it was a possibility, so I kind of kept that to myself. But no, it really was. Once it was after my first year of college. I can't even really describe how. I just kind of ended up at a summer camp for teenagers. And I had the most amazing experience that it kind of snowballed. And I just found myself constantly in spaces working with young people in some sort of capacity. Like you said, in Nicaragua, I was helping young people find employment. In Dominican Republic, I was working in a small nonprofit school there, teaching social studies and English and all sorts of other courses. Ended up a teacher in San Antonio. Now I work for a nonprofit working to empower LGBTQ plus youth. It was never the plan, but it's where my education and my opportunities led me. And I love it. I love working with young people. It just makes, I don't know, I guess it makes you young as I grow older. And I appreciate that so much. So definitely not planned, but definitely worth the ride.
Well, it feels like you just said yes to destiny or to fate. Destiny put you here and there, and you just said, "Okay, I'm going to do it." And you just ended up where you were supposed to be. So, congrats to that, and thank you. Thanks, whoever. I don't know if you still believe, if you still have a metaphysical home, as I might call it. But you can be very thankful that you ended up where you belong, of course.
Sure. Thank you.
June, we already heard about how you got involved in Lambda, but you are, what did you say? You're 6 on the board and you're already working together for 7 years? Is that
about 6 years? Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So, what are your current projects or your most recent projects that you're working on?
Yeah. So, just before, so this was all a plan that we had made before the pandemic.
Yeah. Well.
We wanted to do something else. Actually, we wanted to branch out a little bit, be more active on the internet. We wanted to be do more like foot on groundwork in the rural areas. So we started this project called Queer or Queer durchs Ländle. Just in what the slogan essentially what means to say is that we're sort of hitchhiking through the state. Like that's figuratively speaking what we mean by that. And what we had planned to do and what we are now eventually doing is we are showing queer movies. We're bringing queer culture into these small cities that, very often just have one cinema, single cinema, something like that. And we basically tour the state. And when we're in an area where we find a youth group or a group of activists that want to join us, then we're connecting with them and inviting them. Naturally, we're inviting everyone, but we are reaching out to local activists and volunteers and whatnot to specifically invite them as well. And that is something that we have been working on all while working on our social media initiative. this all was supposed to happen in 2020. We were able to get
you hear quite often.
Yeah, we were able to get one movie in 2020,
good.
in between lockdowns. Yeah, it was a great.
So where did that
night.
happen?
That happened in Künzelsau. We showed the movie Love, Simon, which is a fan favorite.
Yeah.
And we had a really great night. We had some great conversations. We had a great time. Good. The next movie is actually going to be this Friday in Mosbach. We're showing the movie called 17 or 17. That is a local Austrian production. Also a movie that's highlighting the life of a young lesbian girl and her journey, what she's going through, how friendships change, all those things. And we're really excited to see who will come join us.
Yeah. So what do you think how watching movies helps the young queers in these rural areas, or not rural, but in these small cities?
I think it helps in two ways. I think, first of all, it gives young people a sense of self-recognition, right? You can better understand what yourself are feeling if you see someone else going through something that's similar. You can connect to the person behind the screen. You can feel validated. You can learn about words and feelings and concepts, and maybe also bad experiences that someone else might have to prepare you for that. Just the queer world as it is. I think the increasing visibility that we see on Netflix and whatnot, but also on German television, also helps in an, I guess, indirect manner by creating visibility to young people that are maybe not queer, but that are through the media able to just maybe more easily, naturally accept members of the LGBTIQ community as also just members of society. We do not just live in our own microcosmos and stop being gay as soon as we leave that one. That's just not how it works. We are also an integrative and important, valid part of society. And I'm interested to see how the increasing visibility on media is affecting not just queer youth, but also maybe not queer youth.
You just said that one time you were able to show a movie in I can't remember the village's name, but that you had the chance to talk to a few of the kids, teenagers. I don't know how old they were, but with what kind of problems do these young people come to you? Do they actually tell you their problems? Do they tell you what they fear or what they need?
So when we're talking about that specific night or the event we did in Künzelsau, we had, for example, a discussion, I can remember a rather long discussion with a group of Boy and Girl Scouts, actually.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, they were just, happy to see that volunteers were doing something, and they just enjoy being part of a community that does something and that organizes itself. So that is, always a very lovely conversation. Other than that, though, I think what you meant were the more heartfelt conversations, the maybe sometimes difficult conversations. That is for sure something that's more likely to happen within those individual youth groups. We, the board of Ländle, are way more focused on administrative work, and we do not usually enter group spaces so intrusively, right? I'm not the leader of a.
You deliver infrastructure support.
Exactly. That's essentially what we do. But naturally, when we do those meetings, like I told you about a minute ago, where we meet up with all sorts of young activists and group leaders once a year, usually around autumn, we do talk about, what's going on in your youth group. And I remember what we talked about when I was in my youth group. And there were, yeah, of course. And naturally, we would talk about, things like what kind of movies are you watching, what TV show is interesting right now, all those things. But also we did have the possibility to talk about what's going on at school, or I don't know how to tell my parents, or, I don't know if I look right. I think that is a very interesting conversation that I can remember having, feeling like I didn't look gay enough, interestingly enough.
Oh yeah, I know what you're talking about, yes.
Yeah. So
I dyed my hair in platinum blonde and my hair was this short.
Yeah.
And I dyed it like in a very, very platinum blonde. Just to be recognized as dyke.
Yeah, exactly. And actually so did I. I did not dye blonde, but I did cut it short as well. And so those are all conversations that you can have in these safe spaces. And they are so important because of that, because you might be able, where I did have friends at school that maybe weren't queer and that would have loved to listen. But whatever issue I would have had to preface that with a whole long explanation of why and what and how. And to be honest, I didn't feel like doing that. Not every day, not all the time. I'm not a walking encyclopedia. And it was great to have that safe space and that sense of community and regularity and accountability, right? Group was, I believe, every second Thursday at 1900, so 7 p.m. And I knew I could go there every Thursday or every second Thursday and someone would be there. And that was a lovely feeling.
Explain yourself.
No, not at all.
Yeah. So what do you think? What is the situation overall for young queer people in Baden-Württemberg? Is it different to other states in Germany? Is it different to East Frisia or to Berlin? Is it better? Is it worse? Is it just different?
I think it can be different in some ways. Berlin, you just mentioned Berlin, which is, this hub of queer culture with, a queer youth center and all those things. We don't have anything of that scale here in Baden-Württemberg. However, there are, institutes in cities like Stuttgart and Mannheim that provide, similar services, activities, counseling. Whereas in Baden-Württemberg, we also have, like I just said, large rural areas. And young people who grow up there do not have access to those things, and do also sometimes not have access to youth groups like the one I went to. I had to take a 30-minute train ride to get there. And if you're just a little bit further out, there might not be a train at all. And I think that is something that we are trying to focus on, or we're trying to keep in mind, that of course we're so grateful and happy to see all these organizations in all of the cities, but those organizations will very often only reach the youth that actually live there. And the ones that are, in the far off tiny communities have no access to those resources.
So, Justin, Baden-Württemberg, is that similar to, or is Baden-Württemberg the Arizona of Germany, or the Nevada?
Not that hot.
I think
we have a lot of religious conservative people living in Baden-Württemberg. Of course, that was the reason why I was trying to compare both states. Yeah.
I think in the US, there's often painted by the media, especially, this divide between the coasts and the middle, the flyover part of the country, And I don't buy that narrative. I think in the United States, there's simply an urban to rural divide that exists. You can be in a city like Los Angeles or a city like San Francisco, San Diego, and California, and find some of the most liberal pockets in the entire country. But you can drive 1 hour outside to a small town like Bakersfield, California, and you'll find the most conservative pocket in the country. And I think that that happens in every state. So if you're growing up in the heart of Phoenix and kind of a liberal community, things can be great for you as a queer kid, because you can find resources, you can find connections, you can find community. But if you're in these more rural places that continue to embrace really, really conservative perspectives of what society should be, the resources aren't there. The community isn't there. The resources are not there. And so that concerns me the most here in the United States is those kids that are kind of beyond our reach in terms of they happen to be in rural areas where there are no resources or communities to support them.
Yeah. Well, we in Germany, when we hear California, we think, of course, of all the things we see on TV or on Netflix. And California just feels like this huge, open-minded, sunny, gay state. I even got my first tattoo when I was 17 in San Francisco, because I thought, oh my God, this is the gay capital of the world, and I want a tattoo that says love. It's a Chinese sign that's saying love, very creative. So this is something that we sometimes don't think of, that that it doesn't matter if it's California or Pennsylvania. The more rural it gets, the more conservative it gets. And you can find the most accepting people in the most conservative communities as well. So it's not that easy. It's not just black and white. It's not just Republican and Democrat. And it's not just Baden-Württemberg and Berlin and California and New York City. So, yeah.
I agree.
Yeah. So you already told me, June, that you were planning on several things to do in 2020, but COVID-19 just didn't let you do it. Justin, are there any projects that you couldn't do last year that you were planning on doing for It Gets Better?
Well, thankfully, as an organization, because we started through viral video campaigning, we've always been extremely digital in nature, which is a great thing. But we were actually in the process in 2019 of implementing more and more and more in-person programming. And then the pandemic happened and kind of told us, oh, never mind, that's not the direction you can go in. So we had to essentially just pivot back to going full digital, which was a little scary at first. We didn't know if we didn't know if we could do it, if we could reach the kids where we need to go. And we learned a lot during this pandemic. It's really sobering. I think that recent research has come out showing that during this past year, trans youth specifically, 1 in every 2, so 50% of all trans youth in this country were seriously considering suicide at some point during this pandemic. And you have to ask why. Well, they're disconnected from their peers, sometimes the only people they can confide in. They can't visit them in person. If they're in homes where they're not allowed to dress the way they want or use the name they want or the pronouns that they want, it becomes a prison rather than a home. They lose access to medical or health resources that they might have had access to through their schools or in their communities. They have to continue to do schoolwork, which is a burden anyways. And there's been harassment in Zoom spaces and online spaces as well. So they're continuing to face harassment and discrimination from their peers. And if they are kids of color, they're going to continue to deal with racism, or they're going to continue to deal with misogyny. They're going to continue to deal with all of these challenges they had to in the real world. And yet compound all of that and they're alone. And it's so disheartening to know that was the reality for so many trans kids. But it also made our work in the digital space that much more important. That if a kid is able to connect online, to find our TikTok channel or to find our YouTube page or just to stumble on our website, that perhaps they could find, again, the stories, the content that would remind them that even though at that moment they may have been physically alone, they're not going to be alone forever. That there's a huge community of queer people all over this world that are absolutely waiting and ready to embrace them and to love them and to encourage them to be exactly who they are. And so sometimes that's a sobering thought, to have to tell a kid, just wait, it'll come, your moment will come. But this pandemic definitely reminded us that is the reality for a lot of kids, particularly in those rural or conservative places. And it just made our work that much more imperative and important.
Yeah. And on top of that, certain political decisions that were made affecting trans youth. Mm-hmm. And when I just can't imagine how it feels like that somebody is deciding over your own head, is deciding on your life.
For sure.
While I have to sit at home, I can't do anything about it, and I can't talk to my parents about it because they don't support me anyways. And it's just.
I think it was similar research that showed that very thing, that for non-queer kids or particularly kids who don't come from any sort of minority community, it was like 1 in 10 said that our last presidential election directly impacted their lives. But if you survey kids of color or you survey queer kids, the numbers are much, 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 much higher. They rate that, yes, this election directly impacts my ability to live and exist in this world, and hopefully or not do it safely, and to do it in communities that are inclusive. I think queer kids are more directly plugged into politics than non-queer kids because they know what's at stake. They know that their own livelihood is constantly being debated. And you're right, with the anti-trans bathroom bills or the anti-trans kids in sports bills that are trying to be passed across this country. It's a tough time to be a trans kid in America. But again, that's why we do the work that we do, to constantly try and reach them and let them know we're here for you. We got you.
Yeah, but sometimes it's hard. I mean, your campaign is called "It Gets Better," and this is sometimes something that you can't really promise, because we're seeing the backlash of society everywhere everywhere in the whole world, and sometimes it's a wish and not so much a promise.
I agree with you there. I think that particularly for those of us that work for the organization, that have been impacted by the organization, we know firsthand that it gets better does not mean it gets perfect. It does not mean that it's going to get better right now, or that tomorrow is going to be all rainbows and butterflies. But what it does mean to me is, again, when you find that friend you can confide in, when you find that resource that can help you process what you're dealing with, when you're able to connect to mental health resources or find that therapist that you've always been looking for, those are moments that tell you it gets better, that it's okay. You are perfect just the way you are. You just need to find those community and resources in abundance. And that's, again, I think that's what we really try to do as an organization, is not make false promises or not set up some unrealistic goal, but rather say, you can find the joy in the journey and we're here to help.
So it's all about empowering these young people, either for Lambda or for It Gets Better. And we already talked about this yesterday in our pre-meeting. It's Selbstwirksamkeit, self-efficacy. And I don't even know if I pronounce it right. Efficacy? Is that how you say it?
Self-efficacy? Yes.
Efficacy. Thank you.
You're perfect. Your English is great. I don't know.
I know. And Selbstwirksamkeit, it's in German, and it's a word I use quite often, but I've never used it in English. So a person with a high self-efficacy has a lower vulnerability to depression and views challenges as things that are supposed to be mastered, and rather not than threats they should avoid. So this is something. Is this something that we can actually teach and I know you're all into education and educating kids and teenagers. Is it something that we can teach, that they realize they have an impact on others and that they have the power to affect the situation they're in? I mean, telling your story, Justin, like you did in the beginning of this panel, telling that I'm telling my story on stage and June is telling her story, is that actually something that can initiate empowerment structures? And do you understand what I mean?
Yeah, 100%. And I absolutely do. I mean, I am the direct product of that. Seeing young people who had self-actualized, right? They had reached a point in their life where they had the confidence, they had the courage to be who they are, completely changed my perspective of who I could be. And so I absolutely agree with that. But there is a lot of debate. I think you're kind of touching on this. And as an educator, when I was in the classroom, there was this obsession here, at least in the United States, with teaching kids certain attributes. And for a few years, there's been this big obsession around grit, around resilience, is that we need to teach kids that they have what it takes to get through, that they just need to be determined and they need to focus. And I don't necessarily mind that, teaching that as a skill set. But what I'm afraid it does, particularly in an American context, as you can imagine, is it's very, very, very individualistic. That if I'm just strong enough, that if I just push myself hard enough, I'll get through, or I'll be able to conquer this moment.
That's very American.
Yes.
It is. Very American.
But what I hope that we can do here in the United States, particularly in our education system, and particularly with queer youth, is say, yes, you can persevere, you can get through this by leaning on others, by trusting in your community, by finding people you can confide in, by building them up, right? Because you get that same compassion and love in return. Yeah. I am very non-American in that sense, that
you traveled the world.
Individualism doesn't work for me, and I don't think it works for a lot of queer people. I think we see how vitally important community is, and I think that we certainly as communities can develop grit and resilience, but no individual should be expected to do it alone.
Yeah, most definitely. And I always thought the whole concept of resilience is that I don't have that it's not on my, it's not a decision to make. It's not, I can't just decide to be strong. I can't decide to focus. Resilience is something, I don't know, that you can find in a genetic disposition, maybe, or, we have a lot of studies in Germany because of our history on resilience, how our kids actually got through very, very bad war experiences. And even though they were same age, loving mom, loving dad family, where they grew up, still they dealt with the whole war and the insecurities and the fear differently. So I don't think that is something that we have an impact on, actually, but that is just my opinion. June, do you have the feeling that young people in Germany or in Baden-Württemberg, that they have the chance to get all of what you needed back then, or do you see a need for action, for even more action? I mean, you are doing your best, of course, but
right. I think it will take a long time until I don't no longer see a need for action. I'm afraid that point probably never come. And I think as a collective, the effort to uphold democracy and rights for all is going to be a never-ending struggle, essentially. I'd like to quickly touch on what you guys were talking about when you said it gets better, but does it really? What if it doesn't? One of the reasons I'm working at Ländle or for Ländle is that exact reason. I do not enjoy the uncertainty of what if it doesn't get better, and actively doing something helps with that. And I want to, what Ländle and I personally also strive to do, is to empower young people, is to make them confident enough to speak their mind, to realize their vision of a society that they want to live in, to mold society, to be an active participant in democracy on a very basic level. Now, I don't mean going to vote every few years or whatnot, that sure, but that is, a very pessimistic, low standard on democracy. What I mean is actively standing up for the values that democracy provides. And I think that closely ties to what you said and what affects young people in Baden-Württemberg today. We are seeing these right-wing forces, not just in other places in Europe, but in Germany as well. And that is a reality that young people here are now facing, that I'm facing as well.
Yeah, I think I feel you. I know what it feels like to just do something and keep working, trying to be the wind and not the little flag, being the wind and not the fainting. To feel, I don't know if it is the right word, capacitated, or just feeling able to act and not feel ohnmächtig. June, what's ohnmächtig?
Powerless, is it, I guess?
Powerless.
Not feel
yes.
powerless, to feel empowered.
Yeah.
I guess that's very true.
So what would have, when, I don't know how old you are, June.
I'm 26.
26, okay.
Yeah.
So 20 years ago or 15 years ago, when you were a young and flourishing upcoming lesbian girl, what would you have wished for? What would have helped you back then that you didn't get?
For me personally, I think more education and awareness in my environment, may that be school or parentage or whatnot, would have been extremely helpful. Because that is the experience that I personally made. I had expected that my coming out experience would be, I come out and that's it, right? That was the rather naive outlook that I had on this. And then I came to the realization that I had come out, and now it felt like the burden had just started. All of a sudden, I was confronted with having my mother know, but hiding from my grandparents. I was confronted with really odd questions at school. I was fortunate enough not to have many acquaintances or friends at school that would be malicious or anything of the sort. I think I had pre-selected my friends well enough to be lucky enough to avoid that. But I did receive comments that were sometimes absurdly ignorant out of them not knowing. And me having gone through that process of the internal coming out, the personal coming out, having done my research, having been interested in queer culture, I'd already learned so much. And then I was finally ready to come out, and I was confronted with all of these questions that to me, were no longer relevant or, again, ignorant, gay people can't have kids, so why would you be gay? Or odd things, you don't look gay, or all gay men look girlish, or all these weird overdrawn stereotypes that kids just pick up. They didn't make these stuff up themselves. They just reflected what they've been seeing in society. And after I came out, I then felt the burden for a very long time, was the only out kid in my school. That changed later on, but for a while it was the only one in my class. And so that kind of put the burden of that entire situation on me. Do I say something? I should say something. Do I feel like dealing with this right now? those were all questions that then materialized in front of me that I wasn't prepared for. And I really wish that more education, just a little more, would have done a big difference, not having to explain myself and my situation or queer culture or just the living circumstances of LGBTIQ people in society or the right to be in society at all. I wish I wouldn't have had to explain those at that length, in such depth, at that frequency, over and over again.
Yeah.
To me, that was so much work. And I really wish that the next generation, I hope that the next generation has it a little easier when it comes to that.
Well, the next generation has Justin for that, because he's, well, it sounded a little bit like that you were wishing for someone or an organization like It Gets Better, that tries to put all these LGBTQI stories or testimonials into a educational setting and teach. But what did you wish for back then, which can't be that many years ago, because you are still so young, Justin, aren't you?
I'm 33, so I'm definitely older than
June. Very old, yes. Yes,
very old. I mean, I wish that I had found that It Gets Better video 10 years earlier, right? I was 24, almost 25. If I had found that at 14 or 15, it could have meant so much to me to know at that age that I wasn't alone. It would have completely changed my trajectory in life, though.
You were living in your parents' house within a community, so that you would have known more, but it would have been that much easier to imagine. I've
definitely wondered about that, because in my teenage years, the Mormon Church still encouraged conversion therapy.
Yeah.
And so if I had come out as a teenager, that's a place I very well could have landed. And although I experienced trauma from denying so much of myself for so long, I don't know if it's comparable to the kind of trauma I could have experienced as a victim of conversion therapy. So in many ways, I'm grateful for my journey. I'm happy with how it turned out, and it could have gone differently, but this is the life I have, and I'm happy with where I've landed and where I've ended up.
So that's good.
Yeah. And it goes back to that. It gets better. Like, life is not perfect. There are certainly times that I am not thrilled about the way things are going in the world, how things are going in my life.
It's not.
But again, knowing that at this point, so much less of that has to do with whether I'm queer or not is really valuable to me, right? Life is hard enough. And I'm so glad that now at 33, whether or not I'm queer has so much less impact on how happy I can be than it did as a teenager, because I just didn't think it was possible. And now I live who I am on a daily basis, and it matters. That just matters. It just matters that, like, life can be tough, but the queer part of me is not what I'm struggling with anymore, because that part of me I love.
That sounds very, very good. I just hope for everyone in this world that feels love for whomever comes to this point where the love that he or she or they feels inside is not the struggle.
Right.
We all struggle with partnerships, relationships with other people, but we shouldn't struggle with the love inside. I have one last question for you both before we start with the Q&A. I wrote that down because I didn't want to mess that one up, because it's the last question. Working with kids going through struggles and tough times in their life can be very exhausting and energy sapping. How do you pace yourself and conserve your energies and don't lose yourself in the end? This is something I am struggling with quite often. So Do you have a recipe?
I honestly don't. I feel like very often, especially through what I do, and because I'm, a lesbian myself, I will open up the newspaper and I will read Poland this or that, Hungary this or that, in Germany, the AfD this or that. And I will feel overwhelmed by it. And I will have, those conversations with other members of the community, young members of the community. And I will wonder, how is this going to get better? And I think I'm going to have to come back what I said earlier, that the only thing that actually helps me is doing something, having conversations, and reading on people's opinions. I think I feel always like helping other people, speaking their mind and collecting their thoughts, which is something that, is so easily accessible on Twitter or just talking with a friend, always helps a lot. It helps direct my outlook towards the future, towards being a little bit more of an optimistic one, as I apparently tend to be a little pessimistic about things, but that definitely helps a lot, and that is inspiring. But it is for sure difficult to be confronted with all these experiences and realities that the LGBTIQ community faces. And it is not easy, but that is part of being of the community right now, sadly.
You can't save them all. Yeah. So
not yet, working on it.
You're working. You should never stop. Just because you can't, it doesn't mean that you should stop working on it. Definitely not.
Well, for me, I think especially during these last two presidential election years in the United States, in 2016 and then in 2020, I think a lot of really, really, really big issues have come to the forefront of our conversations here in the United States, at least more than I can ever remember them being. It's now, and I think it's because of what June said, like you open up the news and you see that climate change is happening. There are challenges with immigration. There is gun violence here in the United States. There is queer phobia. There's misogyny. There's all of these big problems that I think kids especially are feeling extremely, extremely overwhelmed. And I think part of it is because we're constantly exposed to so much news and so much content, way more than I was as a kid without the internet, that we feel responsible to tackle them all, that we feel responsible to take on every issue as if it's our personal hill to die on. And it's just not feasible. It's just not. And so I think what was healthy, someone told me at one point, is to really narrow it down. Like, of all the things that exist in the world, of all these problems that we want to fix, narrow your list down to maybe 1 to 2 that you're truly, truly not just passionate
something that art does. I do believe that representation can also go wrong. I believe we've seen this for the longest time when, you know, gay characters or the man in a dress kind of thing was nothing, absolutely nothing but the bottom of a uninspired joke in the sitcom. That is something I believe that we should move past. I do believe that sometimes queer characters can be overdrawn, can be eventually covered in stereotypes. That is something that I will sometimes view critically. But overall, I do think that a good balance of happy and healthy people that are living their queer true self, and movies that also highlight the ups and downs of the queer experience
that are
is a good thing.
To the queer,
exactly, the queer experience are important because those are real experiences that people have, and art should reflect that.
I would love if society was already that progressed, so that far, that we can have queer couples, lesbian couples, gay couples, trans couples, whatever, couples on TV where gender or sexual orientation doesn't play any role. But sometimes I think because society is not there yet, we need to show them the specific things that we face and show the problems that we still face, and then give them a chance to identify with us and our problems. But then the story in the movie should take the audience on another level or a further step. So, okay, now we know what the problem is, and then take it on the next level. This sometimes doesn't happen. Very often it's only about coming out and problems with parents, school, and so on. And we all probably know how the movies end like. So, of course, I wish there were other movies that show us as completely normal people that don't have to face any problems. Yeah. So next question. I recently read an article about a person who had a reassignment surgery, but wasn't happy as a man either, and then had surgery again. The person said that they felt like for the medical system, non-binary people are not important. Do you agree with that? Well, I don't know if it was either for June or for Justin. Maybe it's for the both of you, but we have very, very not similar health or medical systems that I don't know. Who feels free to answer that question?
Well, in the United States, I don't think our medical system cares about anybody. But
right. Thank you for your answer. So, June.
Yeah. But no, I completely I agree with the last sentiment that I don't think that non-binary people are very important. I think that in society at large, we still exist very, very, very much in a binary. I think that people are starting to understand what transness is, as long as it's a complete transition to what they think is a woman or what they think is a man. And we're creating new biases and problems in the process of broadening our acceptance of what we understand of men and women if we continue to be restricted to that binary. So I agree. I don't think that our medical system has the know-how, has the knowledge on how to navigate people that exist beyond the binary. And so unfortunately, I think there are some people who think that they need to exist in one gender or another, who find themselves still unhappy, still unfulfilled, because they don't fit in that binary. And we need to create space, and we need to create understanding for where people can exist. I am happy. I think that there are a lot more trans people who are coming out, who are realizing that they don't have to undergo major transformative surgery to be who they are, that whether or not you have, whether you look a certain way or whether you have certain body parts does not dictate what gender you are. And I cannot wait for our medical system to catch up to that sort of understanding and acceptance.
Well, the American medical system has, of course, a problem, and that is helping people to improve their life when they're not in the emergency room. You know, if it's not a life or death situation, yeah. You can lose a lot of money in the States, but not everything is rainbows in Germany as well, right, June?
No, specifically when it comes to healthcare for trans people, the German medical system has a problem as well. It is currently the TSG, which is essentially a set of laws that regulates transition. This is a law that has been, or a set of laws that has been heavily criticized by trans representatives for being anything from discriminatory to outright cruel. I do believe that is something that I want to speak about in regard to this question as well, because this law specifies and pushes trans people into a very narrow box, and it strips the experience of any sort of individualism, which a process naturally is, it intrinsically is. And so I believe that that is an issue that we're facing. And then even beyond that, what Justin said as well, I believe that many physicians, may they be, MDs or doctors working in psychological care, are not well equipped, are not well educated, are not well prepared to work with non-cisgendered people. May they be trans or non-binary or anything else. I feel like we're also letting down our physicians that chose this profession because they wanted to help people largely, and they were not given the tools to do just that. And we do need to work on that.
Definitely. The next question is, how can I, as an individual, help the community improve their acceptance? So now I'm a little unsure if the person that asked the question is part of the community or is an ally. Then it would be two different answers to that question, I assume. But it might be that the person is part of the community.
I mean, the simplest answer for me, whether you're part of the community or not, is get involved with organizations like ours. You can donate, and that can be your money, that can be your time, that can be your skills, whatever you can lend to causes like ours. I think is a great way to get involved in support of the community.
June?
Yeah, so essentially what that question asks is, I think, what is allyship? What can allyship look like? I do not think that a single person from the LGBTIQ community can answer that for anybody else. I think that is something that may look very different on an individual basis. I think what probably most people can agree on is paying attention and doing something in your capacity to the best of your knowledge is probably never wrong. I mean, at the end of the day, intentions do matter a lot, even if maybe actions were sometimes misguided or whatnot. I mean, we all can agree on that intentions do matter nevertheless. I personally feel I'm always grateful when heterosexual people in my life, when I realize that they speak up about injustice when they see it. Like, even without me being in the room, even without me having anything to do with me, you realize that your coworker just made an awful, disrespectful joke or whatnot. Even though there's no queer person in the room, you speak up and you say, hey, might not have been the best thing to say. You might want to rethink that. And that is something that I personally always greatly appreciate.
Yeah, me as well. Because sometimes you just, you don't have the power, you don't have the strength anymore to fight in a situation like that because you're tired, or you're not having a very good day. I appreciate that a lot when somebody else, my friends or just someone else anyone else in the room stands up and says, you can't say that, or you shouldn't say that, think about it. Yeah, I'm very, very grateful for these kind of allies. So next question. Thinking about that whole aspect of heteronormativity, wouldn't it be the ultimate goal that there is no need to talk about sexuality at all, that there is no need for youth to come out? How do we get there? And how do we get from a situation where we need identity politics to a certain degree to deconstruct heteronormativity to a world where we don't need it anymore? And now thank you for the next part. In short, what is your vision for the future and how optimistic, pessimistic are you about it?
Well, the scenario that the first part of the question described is, a long-term idealistic
paradise
goal. I do hope that is something that society as a whole will achieve eventually. I am very certain that I will not see those days. But so I think that is a very optimistic view that's probably going to take a lot of time. For now, I'm both optimistic and pessimistic. I'm optimistic because I see more and more young people living their truth. I see more and more young people speaking up, specifically online. I see more people getting engaged. I see more people speaking up. We have, studies specifically through, I believe it was the University of Hamburg, showing that numbers of specific homophobic, but also otherwise discriminatory sentiments are falling in a certain degree. Whereas other parts of society are struggling with the idea that society is diverse, just that. And that is something that we're also up against. Mm-hmm. And so I have to say that I'm torn. I look at some people and some initiatives and activists, and I feel like this is great. This is our future. And then I, look at replies to a tweet or open a newspaper, and I think we're doomed. But that's what it is. I cannot foresee the future. So just like the rest of us, I will have to wait and find out.
I have a feeling that even though at one point, I don't know when we achieve this paradise, when we're reaching the paradise, but I mean on Earth, not anywhere else. We still have to push our visibility. We have to still create awareness, even though we have already maybe achieved a lot of things, because we're a minority, and minorities always have to, or at least we're a marginalized group. I don't even think that we're a minority, but we have to ensure solidarity by being visible, by putting ourselves out there. And so probably we always have to talk about being queer, being gay, being lesbians, and our specific problems and discrimination.
Yeah. I think this past week, there's been a couple of events here in the US that I think are like a masterclass in this very topic. So 2 different athletes came out in this past week here in the United States. First, last weekend, there is a track runner, a woman who just in her qualifying race to get to the Olympics has set a world record. her name is Shakari. She took the internet by storm because, of course, she had this like beautiful orange hair on. She ran, again, set a world record, ran so fast. But she's just impressive as an athlete. But what was really impressive about her particularly is after she won her race that qualified for the Olympics, she ran into the stands. She immediately went straight to her grandmother to hug and to kiss her, which people just saw as such a beautiful way to express her joy, was finding that connection to her grandmother. And lo and behold, when she was being interviewed, she was being asked about like who is there and who's supporting her. And she very casually was like, oh, well, my girlfriend is here and she's supporting me. And I'm here also with my family, blah, blah, blah. And the interview just kept going. And everyone on the internet went crazy because they're like, she's gay, yay. But again, she didn't come out. She didn't do some major announcement. It was just so casual for her to just be like, yeah, my girlfriend's here supporting me. And to not have the interviewer interrupt her or back away or freak out. I mean, I think that's such progress there. On the flip side, there was an NFL player, a football player, who did make a public coming out statement recently. And that can seem, as the question was asked, that can seem very old school, right? Of someone having to say, oh, by the way, you didn't ask to know this, but I'm just letting you know I'm gay. But in the process of him coming out, he donated $100,000 to the Trevor Project, which is a suicide hotline for LGBTQ plus youth here in the United States. And the NFL, the organization that he works for, decided to match his contribution and donate another $100,000. And I think in that particular industry, that's clearly male dominated, that's clearly very macho, very stereotypically conservative and patriarchal. I think it is important for him to come out and make a public statement and show a gesture of support to the community. I think it's incredibly vital. But I think the way that Shakari came out is also just as vital, just casually mentioning it in conversation. We still need both. And I still think that both are extremely important until we reach that paradise day where no one cares. But unfortunately, that's not the world that we live in. And as long as other people care, queer people have to carry the burden of what it means to come out and be visible for those to come.
And people probably will always care. They will never be careless.
Well, I was thinking that as you said that, I'm like, we always talk about like, oh, in ancient Greek history, like queer relationships were okay and they were encouraged and they were supported, but we never get to hear the naysayers. I'm sure there were some people that if they had Twitter back then, they would be just as upset. Right. So I don't know. I don't know if I will ever see that paradise in my life either. There's always going to be people who hate other people. And, but we can drown them out. We can make them the outliers. We can make sure that kids growing up see so many representations of what it can mean to be human that they just don't care. That's my goal. It's just to so outnumber the naysayers that they become irrelevant.
On the answer of the next question, we can do a whole other panel, a next panel, but maybe Justin, you can keep it short, but I don't know if you can. This question is especially for you. How much do you think religion hinders acceptance? And it's hard to answer, I know, because first we have to differentiate between faith, religion, and church. Mm-hmm. But this question says religion. Does religion hinder acceptance? Well,
the answer is it doesn't have to. I think that there are lots of religious faiths. There's a well-known pastor from the Southern United States that just, I think, posted, because they're campaigning for some political position, but it was a pastor of a very religious community who came out in support of abortion and made a very clear declaration of why. I don't think that some of these major social issues, whether it be queer rights or whether it be abortion rights or whether it be whatever some religious communities choose to take on as their battle, it doesn't have to be. And I think there are a lot of religious people all over the world who have learned to love and embrace queer people. So no, I don't think that religion necessarily hinders acceptance. Unfortunately, though, religion can often be the conduit in which we continue to enforce patriarchal systems, in which we enforce binary perspectives on what it means to, on binary perspectives of sexuality or gender orientation or gender identity. But I don't think that's inherent to religion. I think that, again, powerful people, hateful people can often contort religion to fit their personal agenda, and that often can spread. But I know many religious people who are very accepting and embracing of the queer community at large. And I see them as the future of where hopefully religious dogma will go moving forward.
Even in a fundamental community like your ex-Mormon community?
Ouch, now you're asking me to get personal. I am someone who is absolutely willing to acknowledge that there has been progress made within the Mormon community.
They're
100%. Yes. Or they've made gestures that are enough to appease people. Do they have a far way to go, particularly to repair the damage that they have done? Yes, 100%. But I'm willing to acknowledge progress where progress has been made. But they can do better. But I don't think that Mormonism in and of itself, Mormonism has a lot of problems with misogyny, has a lot of problems with racism. It has a lot of problems with queerphobia. And so those are just kind of embedded in a larger collection of problems that particular community needs to make reparations for. But I do think that some progress is they're trying to make, and I'll acknowledge that. But I think they can do more.
Yeah, I feel you on that. Next question. I also attended the immigration panel in May, and it got me wondering, are there different challenges for children from families with a migration history, thinking about intersectionality as well as the communities? June?
Yeah, so I would say for sure. I think there are two sides to that coin. I believe young or queer people that also belong to a different marginalized group, like having a migrational background, will face discrimination on several different fronts, maybe even simultaneously, which alters their experience, which influences them, which will influence the way they view the world. I also believe that we are fooling ourselves if we believe that the queer community is free of bias and discrimination within ourselves. It is foolhardy to believe that just because we are standing up against discrimination, that we are not capable of having bias or discriminating ourselves. And I think there are two efforts to be made. We need to focus on an open, accepting society that accepts people for who they are in every aspect. And we need to make sure that the queer community itself also holds up to that standard and becomes a community of everyone, where everyone can live their truth and bring their culture and their ideas and all those things. We want to achieve, or I want to achieve, a truly diverse community.
Justin, anything you want to add?
Well, someone put it, and I kind of had agreed with them in the comments, and I had answered their question in text. They had said, I think it's really important for the queer community to also stand up for other minority communities within it, whether that be women, whether that be people of color, the disabled community, religious minorities. 100%, we have to do better. I think it was once said to me, and I've never forgot it, is that the queer community is the one community that every other community will exist within. We are the one that can encompass them all. And as a result, I think that we have a priority to take on the challenges of others. Again, as a community, maybe not as individuals, but as a community, we should see the plight of others and and see that any experience that someone has with discrimination is going to impact people within the queer community at some point. And I'm really happy to say, again, at least here in the United States, most of the Black Lives Matter uprisings that occurred across the country last summer were led by queer people, particularly queer people of color. And I am so proud that our community saw the connection there to our plight within the queer space. But we have to recognize that for a lot of people of color, they don't get to be people of color on one day and queer people on another. They are those two things all the time. And we need to always understand and recognize that and stand up and be there as a community for all members of our community at every step of the way.
1 second. The World Health Organization listed homosexuality as a disease until 1991. It was a crime in Germany till 1994. Yeah. The anti-discrimination law only came in 2009. Same-sex marriage became legal just 4 years ago, and still the hurdles to adopt children are insane. The Bundesregierung, so the government, the federal government, is planning to make the health, what is it? Pflegeversicherung, the
pension fund insurance? I don't know.
Yeah. More expensive for people who don't have children. And gay men are not allowed to donate blood unless they can prove that they haven't had sex for a year. Is politics doing enough? I can answer that question for the both of you. No.
Yeah, I actually thought that question answered itself.
Yes. It was a rhetorical question. But it summed up nearly everything that we still need to work on, what we still have to fight for, at least here in Germany. In the United States, there are different problems, different things you have to fight for within your society, but also in politics. But I think tonight we found more things that we actually have in common, not only problem-wise or focused on the problems that we might have in common. We also found a lot of things that on the one hand, we have a lot of things that separate us from each other, but we have even more things that we found today that we have in common. Especially when you told your story, Justin, how it made us feel is just the best sign for being connected, for sharing the same feeling, for knowing what love is, and that we all decided to love and accept who we are and who we love. So thank you for that. And thank you, Marion, for inviting me to do this moderation. And thank you, Christiane, for trusting me to actually do it. And thank you, Justin and June. Sounds like a new Netflix original series, Justin and June, for being here with me, answering my questions, answering the questions by the participants of this digital event. And I hope that we keep in touch, that we might work on projects together in the future, and that we share the same vision. Thank you.
Yeah, well, also from my side, many thanks to the three of you, and wow, for sharing your experiences and your expertise. And well, you covered so many different questions, really amazing. Thank you. And also for your openness to talk about the topic, and not only from your professional perspectives and backgrounds, but also from your personal biographies, and that made it very special. And I also think that's especially important with this topic, including your work, to be able to reach young people and not just the young ones. And I had the impression that the comparison of Baden-Württemberg and California showed the situation is not so very different for the young LGBTQ plus members. as we maybe here in Germany think, there is still narrowness, lack of understanding, but also bright spots like your organizations. So let's see. Maybe you, June and Justin, would like to collaborate with your institution sometimes in future. Sometimes that would be wonderful, would be great. And maybe we here at the DAC can also organize a personal exchange, and that would be wonderful anyway. So then one day we are going to meet in person. And of course, I also like to thank our audience and also for the questions. And also the colleagues from the Cooperating German-American Center, the state of Baden-Württemberg for supporting us, and my DAC colleague Max for the technical support. Thank you. And let me just add a little bit of event publicity, because the next and last event in the EUREKA series will be on the film industry, and it will take place on July 21st with the actresses Katharina Heger. She's did Charité, and Jackie Emerson, who acted in the Hunger Games. And this event will be moderated by SWR journalist Christiane. And if you want to learn more about us, please check out all of our website. I've seen, Justin, you also put in the website address, but I guess everybody will be able to find us all on the internet. And so finally, thanks again to all of you. Any last remarks? June,
I love you all. No, it's only 16 minutes till kickoff.
Yes.
I wish us all a great soccer game. I don't really care about the soccer. I have to just admit it, but I'm really nervous. What is going to happen? How many rainbow flags we're going to see in the stadium instead of German flags and Hungarian flags? Yeah, I'm just excited right now. And I'm going to play in Baden-Württemberg. I'm going to perform in Baden-Württemberg in the second half of this year. So if you check out my tour schedule on my website, anyhair.com, I would be thrilled to see you in the audience.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great. Any more advertisement? Just
I don't think so.
No, that's fantastic. Really,
I was using a Rode microphone.
Oh, no, stop. So thanks again, guys. And you know what? I just read one of the last here Q&A. Well, it's a little note. I love this. Thank you all for being here.
Yeah.
So thank you, and hopefully we'll meet again. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much for having me.